One football Friday night in small-town Texas, 5 people disappeared from a KFC restaurant and turned up dead in an oil field the next morning. Years later, the case was solved thanks to advances in DNA testing, yet not everyone thinks they got the right guys. This is the story of the Kentucky Fried Chicken murders, the East Texas mystery that's kept people talking for 30 years. Hi friends, I'm Katie, and this is Katie Does Crime. Thank you for joining me for the first time if you're new here, and hello to the usual rapscallions and reprobates. Please consider subscribing or joining me on Patreon if you'd like to hear more true crime stories. A friend of mine emailed me a primer about this case, saying that the murders took place just a few minutes' walk from her parents' house in a tiny town of 11,000 people. My friend can still walk to the fence line where the bodies were found, and her family knows the family of one of the victims. She said that everyone in East Texas, and maybe even all of Texas, knows about these murders. She also said that I had to cover this case because she used proper grammar and everything in her write-up for me. So this one's for you, Andrea. It was September 23rd, 1983 in Kilgore, Texas, about 2 hours east of Dallas, a Friday night in a small town where the only thing that mattered on fall Friday nights was football. Opie Hughes, Mary Tyler, and Joey Johnson were working at the local Kentucky Fried Chicken on Highway 259, and the two friends were there to hang out with Joey while he worked, Monty Landers and David Maxwell, who worked there himself but was off that night. The employees didn't make their usual bank deposit when they were supposed to, and when Mary's daughter came by the restaurant before 11 p.m. to see why her mom hadn't come home from work yet, she found an open door and a bloody floor. About $2,000 in cash was missing, and so were all 5 people who had been inside. Opie, 39 years old, the assistant manager, was a wife, resident of the town for over 10 years, and mother to 3 children. Mary, 37, had 5 children, and her husband usually picked her up at night but had to work that night. David and Joey, 20, and Monty, 19, were all students at Kilgore College and fraternity brothers. Monty was known as a world traveler who wanted to work at an oil company like his dad. David was married and studying computer science. His wife was pregnant with their first baby and was due the day before David's birthday. He'd only worked there for a week and went in on this, his day off, to give Joey, their senior class president and a star athlete, a ride home. The employees' cars were still parked at the restaurant when Mary's daughter found that they had all vanished that night. When the local police immediately started working the case, they determined that after the restaurant was closed and one of the employees was taking out the trash, someone or someones had come in through the back door near the dumpster. The next morning, the 5 bodies were discovered about 10 miles south off of a rural road in an oil field by a man who worked there. The 5 had all been forced over a locked gate and cattle guard and apparently killed before midnight. 4 of them were in the middle of the road, side by side, their pockets cleaned out. Opie, the oldest woman, was 25 or 30 yards away. The way she was holding tight to some dirt and grass, authorities thought she may have been trying to run away. All of them were face down and had been shot execution style in their heads and backs. Their heads lay atop their crossed arms. A man who had eaten lunch at the KFC the day of the kidnappings said they ought to hang the killers with a clothesline, and a local business owner said the town should rise up against the murderers. A $500 reward was offered by another business owner, and the KFC colonel himself put up $10K. People wondered if it had to have been done by a local, someone who could have found their way around the country roads at night. They also wondered if the robbers had to shoot the 5 because they would have recognized the assailants in such a small town. Townsfolk assumed it had to be more than one person to be able to control 5 others. The autopsy confirmed that 11 shots were fired and possibly from 2 guns. 4 people said they saw a light van at the KFC after it had closed. One of these witnesses saw the van near the store's dumpster and thought it odd since no parking spaces are nearby. Another person nearly collided with the van as it was coming from the back of the KFC and noted the driver as a white guy with long black hair and a black, shaggy beard. A woman said a van had pulled into her driveway that night with its lights off, waited a few minutes, and then drove off. She heard gunshots several minutes later. But for the next 12 years, the evidence pointed to nothing, no one. DNA testing was still 10 years away. Then in early 1995, the Attorney General had a victory. A fingernail had been found at the crime scene, just a fragment of a nail that had ripped off of someone and become stuck in victim Joey Johnson's belt. And back at the time of the murders, When thousands of tips were being called in, the name James Earl Mankins Jr. kept coming up. When police had interviewed him, he'd been missing the end of his middle fingernail. Now, all of these years later, they had a fingernail, they had a 42-year-old suspect, and now DNA testing would surely prove the connection. The Texas AG indicted Mankins on 5 counts of capital murder and put him behind bars. The interesting thing is that when the bodies were first found, State Representative Jimmy Mankins had said, "It's a bad situation. It was all uncalled for. There was no need to kill those people. I don't condone robbery, and I damn sure don't condone murder." Representative Jimmy Mankins was, of course, James Earl Mankins Sr., the father of the man who was now accused of murder. But the DNA evidence never came through. For once, when the suspect said the nail either wasn't his or had been planted, he wasn't lying. In November 1995, prosecutors learned that the nail belonged to one of the victims. Mankins' name was expunged from the record, but he went to prison for 10 years on separate drug charges. Years later, authorities tried to pin Mankins and even his wife down again by getting a court order for blood samples so they could attempt to match Mankins' DNA to the crime scene. Once again, Mankins didn't pan out, but that doesn't keep people from thinking he's guilty still. He's 70 years old today and has been out of prison since 2015. In June 2001, a special investigator looked through all the evidence again and found some well-preserved items that would hold up to DNA testing. And wouldn't you know it, a sample from a box for cash register tapes hit a match in the CODIS system of known felons. The man was Darnell Hartsfield, an inmate already serving time in Texas for drug dealing and organized crime. His cousin, Romeo Pinkerton, had also left his DNA behind on a bloody napkin, and they had been known to commit crimes together in the past. Pinkerton had been to prison at least 5 times since 1977, and he'd only been released for 2 days when the KFC murder occurred. Hartsfield was arrested on a different armed robbery charge only 3 days after the murders. They were actually part of dozens of suspects who were interviewed in the days after the abduction and shootings. Like, the police had even made a wanted for questioning poster featuring them. But Pinkerton said he was still in prison at the time, which was, of course, a lie. High school dropout Hartsfield had passed a polygraph test, which was apparently good enough to let him go at the time. They'd been considered questioned and cleared. But now, in November of 2005, Romeo Pinkerton and Darnell Hartsfield were indicted by the Texas Attorney General. 49-year-old Pinkerton went to trial first in 2007, about 2 hours away in Bowie County, after being granted a change of venue due to publicity surrounding the notorious crime. In her opening statement, the assistant AG dropped a bomb when she revealed that DNA tied Pinkerton and Hartsfield to the crime, along with an unknown third person. It had been kept secret since it was discovered in 2003, but Opie Hughes, the woman whose body had been found separate from the others, had been assaulted by this third guy. He could only be identified as a black man through DNA testing on the semen he left behind on her clothes. In court, Pinkerton's defense attorneys claimed that the murders were related to a meth ring operating in the area at the time, and someone wanted the meth recipe from one of the KFC employees, or that victim Mary Tyler had a troubled stepdaughter who may have wanted her dead. As much as those excuses seemed unlikely, there were some things presented at the trial that make you think twice. Like, some investigators never saw that bloody napkin with Pinkerton's blood on it at the KFC, and the crime scene photos didn't show it. Of course, 10 rolls of film were taken, but only one of them developed in a usable way, so I'm sure a lot of things weren't shown in the crime scene photos. A Texas Ranger said he did see the napkin and the box for cash register tapes that had Hartsfield's blood on it, but decided not to bag them that day, and then the case was transferred to the local crime scene unit. And what about that witness who said a white man was driving the getaway van? But the prosecution had a tape where Pinkerton discussed the case with a snitch in prison, and they said he knew things that only someone involved would know, including information about that third man. The defense said the tape's quality was so terrible that you couldn't make heads nor tails of it. They also claimed that the Texas agencies working the case were small and didn't do things properly, like document the evidence and close down the crime scenes before they could be compromised. But recognizing that it was going to be hard to overcome the fact of his blood at the crime scene, Pinkerton pleaded guilty in October 2007 and accepted a plea deal of 5 life sentences. Victim David Maxwell's wife said outside the courtroom, "I'm happy with it because it's 24 years of always wondering what happened. But today I got to look him in the eyes and I got to tell him what my day was like the day he took my husband. I was 18 years old when I married him and 18 years old when I buried him." The son she was 3 months pregnant with at the time of the murders was 23 years old the day Pinkerton was convicted. At the 47-year-old Hartsfield's trial, the prosecutor called it one big, long-armed robbery that turned very, very bad. A witness who had been standing in line at the KFC that night said Hartsfield was standing behind her and was close enough to hear the employees discussing how they hadn't made the bank deposit that day, and there were thousands of dollars in the register. And as for the white or light-colored van that so many witnesses saw on the night of the murders, Hartsfield's roommate in the early 80s was a guy who drove a white utility van. Hartsfield was seen driving that white van or a similar one a week after the killings. Pinkerton didn't have to testify against his cousin as part of the plea deal, but it still only took jurors less than 2 hours to deliberate. Hartsfield was found guilty in September 2008. Pinkerton was first eligible for parole in 2014, but was immediately denied due to his past offenses and the brutality of this crime. He was denied again in 2019. He's 65 years old today, and his next hearing will be in May 2024. Hartsfield, who was 47 at the time of his conviction, was denied parole in 2007 and was scheduled for a hearing in January of this year when he unexpectedly died of a stroke while serving his life sentence. He was 61 years old. Pinkerton has tried to appeal over the years, but for the Rusk County DA, the evidence doesn't lie. He says, there's a whole lot of people who still think other people are responsible, but this is the only place the evidence leads, is to Pinkerton and Hartsfield. Prosecutors say the broken fingernail led to tunnel vision and that there was just plain bad luck involved in this case. Authorities continue to look for that third suspect. My feeling is that they got the right guys. I know eyewitness testimony is unpredictable at best, but 2 of the investigators say that when the employees were talking about how they hadn't made the bank deposit that day, one of them accidentally said there was $15,000 in the register rather than just $1,500. That makes the crime more plausible to me. It also doesn't look great to me that Pinkerton lied about being in jail on the night of the murders when he was questioned. But I know a lot of people don't necessarily buy these guys as the killers. So as always, please let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm just a true crime fan like you are, and I really appreciate you taking a chance on me. Please like and subscribe to my channel if you liked spending this time together. I would be so appreciative. Until next time, I'm Katie, and this has been Katie Does Crime. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm just a true crime. Someone who could have found their way around. For once, when the suspects. Due to publicity surrounding them. But now into. No. Okay. Hartsfield room. I get so cheeky. I'm like, I'm doing great now.